Well, hello everybody. Welcome to our lunchtime talk on plan making in England, the state of play. My name is Suzanne Ormsby, King's Counsel.
And my name is Brendan Brett.
Brendan and I are currently acting for South Gloucestershire Council on promoting their local plan under the legacy provisions. And obviously as part and parcel of that process, we have had to be assisting the three inspectors with the interrelationship of that legacy plan with the new SDS system and the new local plan system. And having done that, we thought it would be helpful if perhaps we gave a little talk more widely on the key issues that are being faced under the new local plan system. So under the new local plan system, the development plan will be required to comprise the spatial development strategy, the SDS, the new local plan, a minerals and waste plan, and a policies map. They may comprise, or the development plan may comprise, supplementary plan or plans and neighbourhood plans. And the purpose of the new SDS, which you will see if those of you who've read the draft NPPF 2025, although obviously by the time it becomes in its final form, it will be 2026. Under Plan Making Policy 1, that sets out the anticipation for what will be contained in the SDSs. And unsurprisingly, this is all about sub-regional planning. And the purpose of these documents is to set a positive vision for future growth at the sub-regional scale. They are required to be in place for a period of at least 20 years, and some SDS authorities are planning for 30 years. They are to apportion the objectively assessed needs to the local planning authorities in respect of those authorities preparing their new local plans. They are to identify the broad locations for growth, which would include new settlements, major urban extensions, and cross-boundary development. They are to identify the broad extent of the green belt and also identify the type, extent, and location of infrastructure. And those plans are required, or those SDSs are required to be in place at the latest by July 2029, which obviously is the end of the parliamentary term of the present government.
I'm sure many of you would have followed with great interest the recent department consultation on areas for producing SDSs. As you know, the Act creates a duty on unitary authorities and other high top-tier authorities under the new system to prepare SDSs, but the Secretary of State also has powers to create strategic planning boards, which will cover areas that go beyond current local authority areas or combine current unitary authorities. And the clear example that's really the forefront of Suzanne and my mind at the moment is the Weper North Somerset area, which will presumably require the creation of a strategic planning board to enact it. Anyway, you will have followed the consultation, and that identifies a number of areas. They produce this very interesting graphic to show where they're thinking that spatial strategies will need to be created. And there are some parts of the country where it follows the unitary authority boundaries very closely, others, such as around Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Bracknell, where the situation is much more complicated, not least because of local government reorganisations, and some areas where it's not currently proposed for SDSs to be prepared.
So turning now to the new local plan system, which is intended to be essentially a 30-month local plan system. And the idea, obviously, of the new local plan system is to implement the sub-regional policies that will be established through the SDSs in their more detailed form. And we'll come on in a short while to look at the development management policies that will be contained in the emerging, or it's likely to be contained in the new NPPF to be produced later on this year, which will mean that local plans will not need to duplicate those policies that are decision-making policies in the NPPF. So what is the new local plan system? Well, as you probably all know, it was introduced on the 25th of March 2026. It's a requirement that local plans be produced within 30 months by local planning authorities, and they are intended to cover a period for at least 15 years, so different to the minimum 20-year period required for the SDS. They are required to conform with the SDS and essentially to provide policies to deliver it at the more detailed level. But just have a little bit of a recap in relation to some old friends, which are now no longer with us. The duty to cooperate, which to a large extent has been the bane of most local plan making authorities' lives, that has, I think probably with great relief, now been abolished. So that is no longer a showstopper to prevent a local plan moving forward in the examination process. That is going to be replaced by a stronger NPPF policy of cooperation. And presently, the policies that govern that are in the draft NPPF at Plan Making Policies 10 and 11. And this stronger policy of cooperation is intended to be demonstrated through statements of common ground with strategic interdependent bodies. And local authorities are required to engage proactively and regularly in relation with those interdependent bodies. And the policy of cooperation applies both to SDSs and new local plans. I suspect, in reality, the policy of cooperation will, and this will remain to be seen, but is likely to be more important at the SDS stage than at the new local plan stage, because the sub-regional planning will already have been done by the time the new local plans come to be created. But in relation to the duty to cooperate, this is meant, the replacement of the duty to cooperate, which is the stronger policy on cooperation, that policy requires strategic authorities and also local authorities to look at where additional infrastructure is needed, where unmet needs could be addressed, where the optimal locations for growth are to be, and the alignment of policies where there are strategic interdependencies. And that's quite sensible, because it ensures that at the SDS sort of strategic level, the adjacent SDS authority is not producing a completely different plan, a completely different strategic policy, which somehow contradicts with or conflicts with the strategic policy in a neighbouring SDS. So that seems to be quite sensible to stop a patchwork quilt of strategic policies being created.
The other old friend that we're now having to say goodbye to are supplementary planning documents as a category. Now, again, you will have all noted the announcement that we will not be able to adopt new supplementary planning documents after the 30th of June, tomorrow, so you've got until tomorrow. And the idea is that SPDs will be replaced by this new system of supplementary planning documents, which will be supplementary plans introduced after the 25th of May 2026. They're very different beasts, however. Supplementary plans will have to be consulted upon for a minimum of 6 weeks, and will be subject to examination by the Planning Inspectorate before they're adopted. And that's because the supplementary plans will form part of the development plan, and they will be capable of superseding and altering the effect, in particular cases, of policies within the development plan. And so it seems, to me at least, that some of the things that supplementary planning documents used to do will need to be incorporated into new local plans to ensure that they are they're fully fleshed out, whereas other things that supplementary planning documents used to be able to do may be required to be incorporated into sort of more informal planning guidance to ensure that some of that detailed indication about how councils expect various applications to deal with planning policies can still be given in a transparent way to developers. And then an important new element, perhaps, of the planning system created by the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act is the scope for national decision-making policies. Now, the Section 98 of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act created this concept of the national decision-making policy. And that is essentially any policy relating to the use and development of land that the Secretary of State designates as a national decision-making policy. And the purpose of the statutory scheme was that these national set policies would become part of the development plan. And so the government would specify an overarching set of consistent policies across the country, and then in local plans, the SDSs will then set the broad location of growth in each regional sub-area, and then the local plans would make specific provision in the local area. Now, in the pending decision on the new NPPF, the Chapter 4 of the existing NPPF was reframed as a set of national decision-making policies, but the underpinning statutory provisions that would give those force as part of the development plan have not yet been commenced. And so at the moment, the proposal appears to be that these policies will be framed as national development management policies, but within the NPPF, so not part of the development plan, will remain material considerations, of course, weighty material considerations in the determination of planning applications.
So moving then on to the local plan system, which has been claimed to be simpler, faster to prepare and more accessible. In my view, that's a very bold claim indeed. The requirements for the new local plan system, as I'm sure you probably know, is set out in the Town and Country Planning Local Planning England Regulations 2026. They are very complicated and detailed, and there is copious amounts of guidance on how to create a new local plan. The reality is that the new local plan system is not actually a 30 months process. It is, in fact, much longer. The MHLC-LG has produced very detailed guidance on creating or updating a local plan using the new system. And if you look in that document, if you haven't already, it contains at least 20 links. Obviously, we're not going to go through all 20 of those links. I think that would probably require a 2-day workshop to do that. And we've only got, I think, probably about another 15 minutes. So what we thought would be helpful to do was just to sort of set out the key requirements that give a broad overview as to how this new process is intended to work. And this, I think, is a little bit naughty because there is a pre-gateway process. So this pre-gateway process takes place prior to the commencement of the 30-month period. Once that process has been completed, it's then followed by 3 gateways, which a local authority has to pass through in order to get to examination of its plan. The local authorities have to allow at least 4 months for the pre-gateway process to be undertaken. But in reality, certainly in my view, this pre-gateway process is likely to take much, much longer. Because when one actually looks at what a local authority is required to do in the pre-gateway process, which is the period that they have to issue notice of intention to commence local plan preparation and a timetable to do that, they have to undertake, first of all, a scoping consultation with all relevant stakeholders on what the plan should contain and what matters they are seeking input on. And the guidance suggests that essentially this pre-gateway process is the gathering of the baseline evidence and the environmental information and the commencement of the environmental report. And clearly, that amount of work has governance, resource management and risk management, and that also needs to be addressed during this pre-gateway process. And once those tasks have been completed, then a local authority can self-certify that they're ready to start and pass through Gateway 1. But you will see from what I've said about the pre-gateway process, and those of you who have been involved in plan making up to this point, that is essentially the evidence gathering process to make sure that you're in a position to actually, I suppose historically, to start your Regulation 18 process. And that is an awful lot of work, and in my view is likely to take much longer than 4 months. But anyway, once a local authority has self-certified that it's undertaken all that pre-commencement work, the authority then has 23 months to get to the point where you can submit the plan for examination. And under Gateway 1, firstly, the authority has to publish the summary of its scope and consultation that it undertook under the pre-commencement process. It then has to plan the content of its emerging local plan, and that planning requires co-creation with other stakeholders prior to it going to consultation in relation to that local plan. And those stakeholders are, our old friends such as Natural England, Historic England, National Highways, plus a whole host of others. So again, that is likely, as we all know from experience, is likely to take time. But once that has been done, that document, that first draft, goes out for consultation for at least 6 weeks. And once that has been undertaken, the local authority are then required to publish a summary of that consultation exercise. And so moving on then to Gateway 2, once the work in relation to Gateway 1 has been undertaken, then the authority moves to Gateway 2, which is apparently going to only take 4 to 6 weeks. Now, that requires the appointment by PINS of a gateway assessor. And the role of that assessor is to see if the plan, which the local authority is now proposing to produce in the light of the consultation responses that have been undertaken under Gateway 1, whether that now new draft or emerging draft of the local plan has potential soundness issues, and whether it meets all the 12 prescribed requirements which are all set out in the 2026 regulations. And of course, that iterative process with a PINS gateway assessor is, I suspect, almost inevitably going to lead to the requirement for further work. And once that process has been gone through, the gateway assessor will provide advice and observations, and those have to be published together with the plan as it exists at that point for a further consultation of 8 weeks, provided the gateway assessor says that the requirements have been met and the plan is potentially sound. So then moving on to Gateway 3, once the authority have gone through a second consultation process and the gateway assessor has under Gateway 2 said, yes, you meet the requirements and it looks like the plan is potentially sound, you then end up with the final draft of the plan, which I suppose is akin to the existing Regulation 19 plan. And that is the version that the local authority intend to submit. But then there's further engagement of the gateway assessor, and it may be a different gateway assessor to the previous gateway assessor, that's unclear. And that gateway assessor will again provide observations and advice on whether the plan is ready for examination. And if the gateway assessor thinks it's not ready for local planning, for plan examination and more work is required, then the local authority cannot submit the plan until the gateway assessor is satisfied with it and the amendments or the more work has been undertaken. Then, hurrah, the local authority arrive at the examination, and the examination is required to take 6 months. And if more work is needed during the course of that 6 months, then the plan can be paused for up to another 6-month period. Otherwise, it has to be withdrawn. So that is almost like a guillotine. So you've gone through all these gateways. And you've undertaken all this work, and you've had 2 gateway assessors who've said that it looks as though it's all right. But when it gets in front of the inspectors appointed to examine the plan, and those inspectors say, well, actually, we think you need to do more work, and we think that work's going to take more than 6 months, it does look as though it's game over at that point, which almost has the same effect as the duty to cooperate did, but at least that was at the start of the process, not at the end of it. But there it is. And then the local authority have 1 month to adopt the plan. So you will see probably from the tone, or hear from the tone of my voice, that I do have some reservations about this plan. I think it is putting a huge burden on local authorities. I think the programme is pretty ambitious, particularly given, as Brendan has just said, that these decision making policies are not going to have the status of section 38 subsection 6. So that means that that they won't have that status. And the reason why originally it was proposed that they would have that status was one of the main pillars to enable the 30-month period to be complied with. But you can see that the plan making is dependent on other players, not least 2 interventions by the Planning Inspectorate through the gateway assessors. That's a resource concern. We all know how difficult it is to source planning inspectors, etc. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. More work could be required by those gateway assessors, which doesn't seem to really have been allowed for in the time period. And it's quite unclear, it seems to me, how the co-creation process will work in practice. Could be very time consuming, and also we all know that these stakeholder bodies are not always that quick in responding because they've got their other responsibilities and obligations. So and also the requirement of statements of common ground, which will be dependent on others acting swiftly. There is a requirement to assist, so local authorities can rely on a requirement to assist if Natural England aren't engaging. But how useful that will actually be in practice remains to be seen. And before I come on to the timings, just to make one other point, the new local plans are clearly intended to be in sync with the spatial development strategies. That the process is intended, as you'll have seen, to be sequential. So the idea is that you have your SDS authority, it produces its SDS, and then the local plan comes on behind that. But because the system is currently in flux at the moment, I think there is a real risk that the whole process is going to become very much out of sync with each other, with local authorities being required to move ahead with their local plans in the absence of adopted SDSs. So then, Carl, finally to timings. They're complicated, but basically, the position at the moment is this. If you are a local authority with an existing old-style local plan, you have to start the process, the pre-commencement gateway process, which is essentially notice to commence within 4 years and 8 months of the date of the adoption of your local plan, or by the 31st of December of this year, whichever is the latest. But you will see, as I've already said, I think you're going to have to start your plans a lot earlier than 4 years and 8 months, because that's only going to give you a 4-month window to do all that work that you're required to do as part of the pre-commencement process. Any local authority that submits their plan to the Inspectorate by the 31st of December of this year does not need to comply with the new local plan system and can proceed under 2024. So any legacy plans which can be submitted to the Planning Inspectorate or Secretary of State by December 2026 will be able to proceed under the new 2024 MPPF. And Brendan's going to talk about authorities that are seeking to do that in a short while. And then finally, which is the situation that Brendan and I are in under with South Gloucestershire, is that any local plan that's already been submitted prior to the 12th of March, that should read 2026, not 2025. They can proceed under the legacy local plan process and under the transitional provisions of the 2024 MPPF, provided the plan will meet 80% or more of the authority's local housing need using the standard method published in 12th of December 2024. And there's a handful of plans that are proceeding under that process. I think most legacy plans are proceeding under the second point there, which is submission by the 31st of December and compliance with the 2024 MPPF.
So leading on from that, well, what are people actually doing so far as we can tell from here in London? Well, there are, as far as we're aware, definitely 3 plans that are proceeding under that third bullet point, who are taking advantage of the transitional provisions in the 2025 MPPF so that they can apply both the MPPF and the related planning practice guidance, including the assessment of housing need, very importantly, as it stood in December 2024. And those are South Gloucestershire, which Suzanne and I are promoting on behalf of the council there. And that's currently in the course of examination, and we're off tomorrow, well, this evening, to start another week of it tomorrow.
Week 4.
Week 4 or 5. And then East Devon District Council, they had a second Reg 19 that concluded in the new year, and they were proposing to submit in June. At the end of May, I believe, however, that was pushed back a bit because it seemed, particularly on housing, they still had more work to do. But at that stage, they were still proposing to submit before the end of December. And Coventry Council are currently in examination in this world. They've had some more hearings this month. Again, a lot of it focused on need, which is definitely Suzanne and my experience of these transitional plans, whilst the Inspectorate is very aware of the strange hypothetical world that we're dealing with when applying the MPPF from 2 years ago to a plan being examined now. It does cause some need for careful explanation about how all the different systems fit together. So those are the 3 that we're definitely aware are proceeding under those transitional provisions. And then quite a number of local planning authorities are pursuing plans that they will need to submit before 31st of December. This is just a snapshot of them, and you can see some of them there. I don't intend to go through them all, but again, they are pushing that deadline pretty hard, because if they don't get it in time and it's not in a good shape, then they're going to have to start again from scratch. And indeed, some that's exactly what did happen with a group of councils that sought, like South Gloucestershire, to take advantage of the transitional provision to avoid the potential consequences of a change in the standard methodology for need in particular. But when they came to submission, their draft plans were failing to meet the 80% new standard methodology threshold test for bringing themselves within those transitional provisions. And these include Dacorum, Hydeburn, Epsom, Wolverhampton and Great Yarmouth. And so they were then, having fallen that hurdle, directed to start new plans under the new plan making system, essentially starting again. And it's very important to note also, as some of you may be aware, that there are some local authorities who were not necessarily in the course of producing new plans or who had a challenging housing land supply position, that the government directed to commence making plans under the new plan making system, and 39 in total. So they're really going to be sort of vanguard of the new plan making system, and we'll see whether they will achieve that pretty ambitious timeline of publishing their Gateway 1 self-assessment by the 31st of October. So I think we'll get a sense, won't we, Suzanne, pretty quickly about how realistic that pre-Gateway and Gateway 1 process is going to be, and what kind of implications that's going to have for timings.
Yeah, that will be a good litmus test to see those port authorities that have been directed to do that have got 4 months basically to get their act together to move to Gateway 1. So yeah.
Indeed, and 4 months over which, as we know, lots of people seem to be challenging. Not everyone's going to be easy to communicate with. So I think very quickly some of these ambitious and optimistic assessments of timing a dose of realism may be introduced into the conversation pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then finally, on this, in terms of SDS that we spoke about towards the beginning of this presentation, well, obviously there's a degree of uncertainty about exactly how these are going to be devised, as there are still some sets of regulations that need to be made, and also, of course, the government needs to announce the outcome of the SDS areas consultation we previously discussed about. But from our experience dealing in South Gloucestershire, this is the sort of indication that WECA is currently thinking about in terms of the West of England spatial strategy, and that's looking to be a 30-year spatial development strategy, with initial engagement over this summer and autumn, a draft of that consulted upon in summer autumn next year, examination in 2028, and adoption spring 2029. And it's very important to see how that's panning out, because, of course, the deadline for the adoption of these SDSs is the spring of 2029. And the West of England, WECA and North Somerset have quite a long history of working together on these things, and are quite, in many ways, quite clued up. So it's quite notable that even one of the more sophisticated, well-tooled up areas is still going to be pushing against that deadline of April 2029 for adoption.
And the intention is that obviously we're dealing with their legacy plan, which the anticipation is that will be adopted at the end of the year, hopefully. And then obviously that will enable them to do their SDS, which will then mean that their new local plans will be coming through following on from spring 2029. So in the summer of 2029 is when they're going to start doing their kind of pre-commencement sort of Gateway 1 system. So that's how it should be working, because obviously the whole process is intended to be sequential. But I'm a little bit more concerned about those 39 authorities that have been directed to start their local plan making in the absence of an SDS. But there it is. Well, that's the end of our talk. I think we've got 2 questions in the Q&A box, so we'll just have a little look at those. Hopefully they won't be too difficult. You're both saying it, aren't you? Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think the first question, please can you clarify a point you made, saying it is not clear if the national development and national decision-making policies will be part of the statutory development plan. Well, I think the legal implications of that are simply this, is, as Brendan said, that they will be material considerations of significant weight, but they won't have the statutory force of section 38 subsection 6, because they won't be part of the development plan. So it's no more complicated or easier than that, I think. And then there's often there being no SPDs that the local planning authority continue to have effect. Yes, I mean, I think the SPDs will continue to have effect. You just can't make any more. I think.
Yes, and they will continue to have effect until you adopt your first new style local plan, at which point I understand they will be nullified. So you can, if you have a legacy plan, or in existence, or you're promoting a plan using the transitional provisions, your existing SPDs will still be enforced and able to be used. And as soon as you adopt your new star local plan, that will die then at that stage, all of your SPDs.
So I suppose that the way to try and keep those alive would be to have those, to morph those into supplementary plans, maybe just update them and morph them over if you want to retain the content of them. That might be one way of doing it. Once you've got your local plan in place, you can then hopefully maybe in sort of parallel get on with morphing those SPDs over supplementary plans. That might be one way of dealing with it, I think.
Yeah, or if there's sort of points of detail that would be appropriate to include in your new style local plan, it might be that some of the more important bits you should make sure you plug into your first new style local plan when you're proposing that, so that there's no gap between
the two.
Yeah.
I think what happens if it comes to me? Well, that's a very good question, isn't it? I don't think that there's any penalty, other than I think the likelihood is that you will then get a direction by the Secretary of State, who will probably take over your plan making. I think that's probably the reality of what will happen. But we'll have to see, won't we, how many local authorities fail to meet the 30-month time frame, because there might be rather a lot of them. Right, well, I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much indeed. Is there any more? Yeah, hopefully that was helpful to you all. I hope you enjoy the rest of your lunch break. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye.